Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Aiken. I'll come back and introduce myself a little bit later, but I am helping with the community engagement for this process. But to get us kicked off today, we are going to bring up Dr. Stephen Kane to start our meeting. So thank you for being here, and Dr. Kane.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and welcome, everybody. Welcome to Montgomery College and to the kickoff for the design charrette of the Catherine and Isiah Leggett building. We're very excited to be here tonight, and I'm just going to briefly share a few thoughts with you about how this is going to work, walk you through that briefly. But before I do, I want to introduce some key people who are from the college who are in the room tonight. So first is Dr. Brad Stewart, who is the Vice President and Provost of the Takoma Park campus. And next is Margaret Latimer, who is the Vice President and Provost of the Germantown campus. Margaret also oversees all of the science and math programs at the college. And then we have Mr. Marvin Mills, who is the Vice President of Facilities and Public Safety. His team will be leading this project. So tonight you hear first from our president, Dr. Darien Pollard, who I'll introduce in a moment. Yeah, absolutely. Never get in the way of applause and your boss. So we'll spend the majority of the evening connecting with the architect team and the community engagement partners. Together, they will lead the meeting. Their key objective is to help us understand how design and community engagement processes come together to make a charrette, a process in which we all have input to the final design of the building. Additionally, the architects will share the first step of any design process, which is the site analysis, and this will be followed by a question and answer period. And we'll end the evening with what I am told are called engagement stations, which allow for one-on-one feedback on key topics. You'll hear more about that later. So now let me invite Dr. Pollard to join us for a few moments to reflect on where we have been, our commitments, including her directives to the staff, and now to the design team, and our next steps going forward. Dr. Pollard.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. And what we didn't mention is that there is no ice cream at the engagement stations, but I think that there will be ample opportunity for wonderful participation and certainly a colorful array of Post-it notes, I noted, to look a little bit like sherbet. So we are delighted to be here. I'm Darien Pollard. I am the president of Montgomery College and want to thank our colleagues for hosting us here this evening and certainly thank each and every one of you for choosing to be here tonight. This is a very important milestone moment for us as we have continued the process of designing this new facility, which will be transformative for this particular campus. So we're committed to a process, and I want to revisit with you a few points of how we arrived at this particular point, and then I have the luxury as the president of the college to be quiet and shut up and sit down and listen, and I'm very delighted to be in that space to do so. So we have a deck here that we're going to go through a few points, and I'm going to be very brief, and then get to the main actors who are going to help us facilitate the charrette process. So how did we get to this point that we're in right now, starting tonight with our design charrette process? Many of you have been participative in a series of community conversations that we held that started in March of last year and then moved in, actually started conversations with the city of Takoma Park, but then moved into a series of community conversations where we spent a considerable amount of time listening to participant stakeholders from all across our deep group of people who are deeply connected to this project and deeply invested in it. At that time, we also held an online comment forum for people to offer perspectives about the project. And more importantly, as a result of the feedback that we received, we also hired an architect who could sit down and synthesize that information, but then give us a series of options that we can consider based on the feedback that we received. I took a considerable amount of time to review every comment that came in and to listen to perspectives of various people who wanted to give me ideas and perspectives. And on September 29th, I offered and issued a memo to the community, both internal and external, that highlighted the perspectives I have based on what I learned in that meeting. And in that, I took some very specific ideas. One is that I reaffirmed our facilities master plan that the college had engaged in several years ago. We also went through a process I did of talking about a series of design directives, things that I would be directing my internal team and then the people that we would be hiring to facilitate this process that they would engage in. I issued a series of construction directives, things that I'd heard that were important from the community that we needed to make sure that we were taking care of. We also committed to hiring the right architect, and that was very important. Architects who'd had experience in designing not only this type of facility, but that had deep experience in building this type of facility in communities that are reflective of the one that we have in Takoma Park. And then finally, we expressed and reaffirmed our commitment to a design charrette process that we're kicking off here tonight. In addition to that, and just to highlight, I wanted to demonstrate that I'd heard from the community a number of things that they thought were important that we needed to take in consideration as we were to move through this design process. There were several design things that were brought up, such as height, setback, lighting, air handling, and then again, the architect's experience and knowledge in this work. There were those who also expressed interest and concerns about construction. How do we think about the ways we mitigate the impact on our neighbors who are most adjacent to the campus? In addition to that, how do we manage noise and construction traffic? All of those issues are deeply important to us as well as we think about the ways in which our students and employees have to come onto our campus. What we've heard after that process, and again, we've had multiple opportunities to hear from many constituents, a few of the things that have been very important. We've heard people talk and ask us to consider the building height. That's been very important, particularly along Takoma Avenue. We've also heard people share with us the location of our laboratories in relationship to the streets, venting and air handling, operational noises for the building, and also the setback of the new building from Takoma Avenue. We've heard a few other things as well. Folks also expressed concern to us that they wanted to know that we heard them about their interest in preserving trees along Takoma and Lower Fenton Avenue, building utilization for various functions, being very thoughtful about egress and entrances into the building, the construction impact. How do we mitigate what that might mean for both our students, our employees, and the community that surrounds this campus? And certainly, how do we ensure that we can help with mobility by keeping the streets open during this process? So what we're going to do going forward and what our commitments have been, and I've articulated this in as many places as I can, one is that we have kept our commitments and we'll continue to do that. We've hired an architect that you'll be meeting here momentarily who has deep competence in this space. They have done, and you'll hear about them, I won't list them because they're going to talk about, but they have done phenomenal facilities in the spaces and places that we've talked about and have the ability to, I think, hear the concerns that have been raised and also help us think differently, those of us at the college, about what our expectations are in this space. In addition to that, we are going to begin the charrette process. We have conducted, prior to this time, a series of stakeholder audits. We have a community engagement firm that has been deeply engaged with members of the community to hear what it is that they need us to hear in this process, and we're going to be continuing that process, and you'll hear more about that momentarily. Last week, we held the ice cream social to allow people to have an introductory meeting with both the design team and our community engagement team, and also folks from the college so that we could talk about and hear from folks put face to face. And then we're holding this kickoff meeting. In addition to that, many of you will know there have been lots and lots and lots and lots of meetings prior to this, both individually and certainly also with key stakeholders and informants in the community to help us understand how to design this process. And then our other commitment is that we're going to hire our construction team early so that we have the ability to have them be on board with us as we start this process. In fact, Mr. Mills has advocated for us, and I've accepted recommendations to hire a construction manager, what is that, at risk. There's a whole term of art with that they are with us from the beginning of this process and will continue through the end, versus coming in later and trying to help us correct or mitigate things that need to be done. Our commitment also has been around communication. So I would hope that if you're not familiar, that you would take the time to be familiar with the project website. You can see here it's montgomerycollege.edu/TPSS-design. This will have all of the records that we have in terms of community conversations. We will videotape, as you're seeing here. You'll be able to see these on MCTV and other locations. And also any PowerPoint decks or presentations, they will be there, and also any written correspondence so that you can keep track of that. Mr. Ray Gilmer, who's our Vice President of Communications, has taken this on as a task that he said, I'm going to make sure that no one can say that there's not anything there. So we have a very diligent process, and he is taking great ownership of that. Tonight, we have the opportunity for you to meet and hear from some very key partners for us in this process. First being, obviously, our Smith Group JJR integrated design firm. Bob Bull, who is the principal there, he's going to be talking about, as we heard earlier, some things about our site design and site analysis and thinking about some early things and soliciting and helping you see some of those points that we're trying to respond to that we've heard. And then we're also going to have a facilitated conversation. And they were very, and this is a very important point, as a part of the proposal that they brought, because they understood the dynamics here. They said, as a part of their proposal, to bring to us linked strategies. And we're very excited to have Michael Aiken and his team join the Smith Group, because they are going to work hand in hand with us to ensure that we have a process that allows us to hear, allows us to act and respond, and then understand the directions that we're going in from this point forward. So we're deeply grateful and excited to work with both of these entities as they help us produce the building that will ultimately be in the best interest of the commitments that we've made. That commitment is actually where I will end my point. You've heard me multiple points, and I've listened. The thing that I think I do best is listen. And as a part of that listening is to make sure that I hear the issues, the concerns, the excitements, the joys, the opportunities that this building presents for us and our campus and this community. But in addition to that, very clearly, and I've said this probably every way that I can, that we have a commitment to a process which we have articulated and will be committed to. In addition to that, that's going to help us balance, help the college balance its needs for our students, our neighbors, and also demonstrate the fiscal prudence that we have to have in these days and times. With that, thank you for choosing to be here tonight. Thank you for what will happen over the next several sessions. And more importantly, thank you all for this commitment to the students and the community that we have. With that, I have the opportunity to turn it over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard. As we've been introduced as Smith Group JJR, I am an architect, but there's a team of architects. I'm not the architect. There's a small group of people sitting back in the corner there. Jamie, Wade, Bill, and Kevin up here are part of our team. We have a much larger team sitting back at our office here in DC, and we'll get into a little bit more about our history and our experience and why we're here. But we're really happy to be part of this process. I don't know if all of you understand this. We've been through processes like this before. This is a really unique opportunity. The way the college has formatted this is not very common, and you're, as a neighborhood group, being given a very rare opportunity to really influence a design from a really fundamental position early in the design stage, which normally is not the case. So I can attest to the fact that many times I've been through this process before. This is a rare opportunity, so please take advantage of it. I'd like to, before we get too far along, introduce Michael, and he will talk a little bit more about his firm and their expertise as we get further along in the presentation. So, as I said, we are Smith Group JJR. We are a national design firm. We have 11 offices in the United States and 1 overseas. We have about 1,300 people currently, 1,400 people, including a new office in Boston that we just opened this year. And we have had a history in the Washington, D.C. area since the mid-50s, which was an original firm that was started as a sole proprietorship in the mid-50s. So we've had consistent operation within the region for a really long time. In fact, we've done several buildings that you may be familiar with that are local to the Silver Spring area, including the Discovery headquarters, which unfortunately is being converted into something else, but we're optimistic that that will continue to be a viable facility going forward in downtown Silver Spring. And also the Holy Cross bed tower expansion that looms over 495. So if you're driving by through Silver Spring on 495, it's very hard to miss that. And then one of the buildings that we're most proud of is the one we're sitting in here. We were part of the original design team and execution team for the Cultural Arts Center. We're very proud of the experience that we had with the college on this project, and we're hoping to repeat that success moving forward with the Math and Science project on the Takoma Park campus. Up on the slide is a representation of some of the other expertise that we bring to bear to this project. We have an expertise in math and science buildings, also referred to sometimes as STEM, but in this particular case, math and science. And it comes from a breadth of experience across the country. It's not just in the Washington, D.C. area. And that's one of the benefits of having such a large firm like ours is we can bring in that expertise to be very specific and take advantage of that level of expertise across the country and very unique aspects of it and how they apply to Montgomery College and its Takoma Park campus. So some of the highlights: 8-time winner of Lab of the Year. We've done 25 million square feet of laboratories across the country. And we do have that expertise in higher education as well. And so there's 15 million square feet of higher education academic facilities that we've been responsible for across the country. Next slide. One of the projects that you also may be familiar with is the American University Washington College of Law. This is a project that was recently completed about 2.5 years ago, right in downtown, heading towards downtown in DC, in the Tenley town area of DC. The image you see on the slide is the completed facility. The road that's going across the bottom of the slide is Wisconsin Avenue, and that's Tenley Circle. This project has a very similar profile to the Math and Science project, in that you can see some of the attributes listed on the right side of the slide. That some of them may sound really familiar to you, but this was a large facility, over 300,000 square feet, that was tucked into an established neighborhood in Tenley town. I don't know if you know the cross streets, but this is a very similar historic area, similar to the neighborhood that we're sitting in right now. It also had very legitimate traffic concerns, construction issues. There was a very vocal support of the tree preservation within the neighborhood. And also there were many concerns that the neighbors had about how the building was going to be articulated, sometimes referred to as fenestration as an architectural term, but how is it going to be lit from the inside, and how will that light be impacted on the neighbor or have impact on the neighborhood around it. So throughout that process to successfully design and implement the Washington College of Law, we found that there was an engagement with the community that was very successful. And what we're proposing to do here is model many of the interactions that we're having with you over the next couple of weeks and couple of months on that successful process. And I think as we explain it a little further, hopefully you'll see that it is going to be very unique, and it is going to be something that you may not have had an experience to be part of in the past. So before we get into the explanation of how that's going to work, we understand that this is a conversation that has already been going on for many months and years. And as part of our initial introduction to the project, we went back and cataloged all the conversations and all the commitments that have been made in the past, and what are the key issues, what we're referring to as major concerns here, that have been brought up by the neighbors. Some of these are college issues, but primarily these are going to be the design drivers. This is going to be the checklist we use as we move forward to make sure that we're addressing all the key issues that have been brought up by not only the design team, the college, but also the neighbors. We're going to talk about a little bit later about what's going to happen later tonight, but there's going to be a gallery session or a gallery walk out in the lobby. This board, or a board version of this, will be out there at that time. And it will be available to you to add to it. So this is not meant to be a fixed in time list of issues, but it's meant to be a living document. So as new issues come up, if there's something that is occurring to you tonight after we talk about it, take a post-it note, put it up on the board. We're going to record it. We're going to update this list. We're going to keep it as an active document that we can continue to refer to as we're developing the design going forward. But so a little bit more about the process. We'll go back to that last slide in a minute. But one of the things that we thought would be very effective, and again, modeling it on the American University Washington College Law project that we thought was successful, is that we've been using the term's been thrown out, charrette. And what does charrette mean? As architects, we know what that means. It usually means a very intensive work session where you're working really closely with someone else, you're sharing sketches, you're working across the table. We can't do that with a group this size. But there is a way that we can engage you in the process of design. And the way we're proposing to do it is we're going to show with you, or share with you at each stage through this process, multiple options on how we could achieve a particular design problem or resolve a particular design problem. And we're going to share with you why different options make more sense over others. And through that process, we'll collect your feedback on that and use that feedback to generate another iteration or another series of iterations that can then, throughout the course of multiple phases or multiple stages, be representational of your feedback and then closing in on what would slowly become a more focused and unified singular design. And what we're proposing here in this process is 5 different phases of development, starting with what would be really a very conceptual early stage. That's kind of where we are tonight, where we're really just talking about the design parameters and the major issues of the site that are going to be key metrics, key aspects that we're going to have to address. After we complete the design or the site analysis portion, we move into what would really be considered like a very fuzzy design phase for you all, but we refer to it as massing and massing configuration, conceptualization of the building on the site. This is where we're really starting to take the bulk of the building and trying to fit it into the site in a meaningful way so that we can respond to some of the internal programmatic drivers while we're also addressing some of the external drivers for the design. And again, we intend to develop multiple options that will be shared with you. You'll be able to provide feedback on each one of those options. We will then take that feedback and generate another version. And with each step of these iterations, we will get more and more building-like, more and more specific. So moving from that second stage, which was the massing, into a third stage, it starts to almost look like architecture at that point. Some of the early aspects of what you might see will just look like very simple building blocks. But then you'll start to see in this third stage things that start to look like architectural concepts, a little bit of stylistic expression, a little bit more about the systems that are going to support the building. This is a lab building, so it will have a lot of systems, a lot of mechanical, HVAC, and obviously some of the other common lighting and structural systems that you'd find in any building. But each one of those systems has a very particular influence on the design, and we'll begin to start to articulate that in the third phase of this development. And then in the fourth stage, we really start to look at how that becomes real architecture. We start to test real design ideas that start to indicate expression and architectural vocabulary and architectural massing on the site. And then in the last stage, we're really talking about or presenting to you what really is going to start to look like a building. We'll be able to produce realistic looking renderings that have windows and have doorways and loading docks and things like that that you'll be able to relate to very easily and very quickly. But it really does take a process where we start out very foggy, very, very vague, and we move into a more specific design approach. And it does take these iterations, which is normally what we do internalized in our office, but we're going to sort of bring it to you throughout various stages of that process to glean your feedback so that you can influence the next phase. So what we are proposing to do through this process is, again, we're going to have that checklist that we talked about a few minutes ago, and we're always going to have that in the back of our minds or even on the table as we're talking about it. And at each stage of this development process, this iterative process, different aspects of those issues that have already been brought up are more relevant than others. And what we went through and essentially identified which issues become the most apparent or most critical during each one of these 5 stages. So in the first stage, obviously, we're talking about the process overview and the site overview. We're really talking about the form, the height of the building, the green space, and the setbacks. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the site analysis here in a minute. Next one. And then the second phase, when we're really developing the building massing, here we're talking about form, height, the green space, the setbacks. Again, we're going to start to get into sustainability. The college has already expressed a desire to be LEED certified for this project, so we'll be at a minimum LEED silver, but we're going to push on that to make sure that we're as environmentally responsive as possible through the design process. And then we'll also be looking at some of the initial take on how you flow in and out of the building. How do you provide access for not only pedestrians but for vehicles, and how do you manage access around the building, including loading, and how other issues might be addressed with access to the building at different times during the day. And then when we get into this third stage, again, this is when we really start to talk about the systems. This is when, like, some of the issues that you may have already focused in on relative to noise, HVAC, some of the chemicals that are likely going to be used in the building, and how are they going to be dealt with, how are they going to be exhausted from the building, where are they going to be exhausted. We'll start to tackle those initial concepts in that third stage. And then in the fourth stage, again, we're starting to get more realistic, more building-like. So we will start beginning to talk about color, materials presented or proposed for the exterior of the building, windows, fenestration again, which is a term that we use for how the building is articulated with windows and openings. And throughout the whole process, we'll be looking at how the proposed designs relate to the budget. And that's just an important part of every aspect of this. The last phase, when it's really a very specific design, hopefully we're, again, focused on a singular design, we can then begin to start to talk about construction issues. The college has committed to bring on a construction manager at risk, which we talked about earlier. They are not in the room currently. So we will be able to, as architects, interpret some of those issues early during the design phase, but it's really going to be dependent on that construction expertise and that team when they do get on board later in the fall to really address some of the issues, like once the design is actually established, how are you going to, or how is the construction firm going to implement that construction process, and how is that going to impact the neighborhood? Again, we can make some assumptions on that right now, but it's going to be very difficult for us to do that without that individual, that voice in the room. And that's the summary of the two. So with that, I'm sorry I was a little long-winded, but I hand it over to Michael to talk about the process.
Thank you, Bob. It's really a shame to be in a theater and not have walk-on music. I think that would be a nice transition. Our commitment through this process is not to talk at you for long periods of time. So with that, I'm going to talk at you for a little bit, and we'll make sure that we get to the engagement pretty quickly. So my name is Michael Aiken. I run a firm called Link Strategic Partners. We're a stakeholder engagement firm. We work nationally. We have offices in 5 cities, but our headquarters are right up the street in Columbia Heights in Washington, D.C. Our entire role on this project, our entire job, our entire scope is to make sure that the community engagement process is authentic, transparent, and followed throughout every step of this process. So my team, many of them are back here and will be at engagement stations. We're ambivalent on the building design. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that all of the feedback that you want into the process is recorded and used at every step of the process. That's what we're here for. That'll be our job throughout. We do that through something called a feedback loop, which basically is a very fancy consulting way of saying we're going to listen to you and then we're going to use that feedback, but we're also going to come back to you every time we're together and tell you specifically how we use that feedback. So our next meeting together is going to say, we heard this feedback last time. This is how it's informed getting us to this stage. Did we get that right or not? So it's a constant check on the process throughout. The other thing we believe very strongly in is that engagement should reach people where they are. We will do everything we can to get up to speed on the issues in this community, and even with that, and even with all of the reading we've done of the community conversations and all the videos we've watched and all the stakeholder audits, we will still never know more about this community than you do. So you are the experts, and our job is to get that into the process and make sure it's used. That means the engagement needs to meet people where they are. Not everyone can come out to an evening town hall style format. So we want to make sure that it's not dependent on you always coming to us, but we have plenty of opportunities to go to you as well, and I'll work through tonight what that looks like. We also want to make sure that the way we get feedback meets what you want us to have. Sometimes people want to get up in a meeting and provide feedback to a full room of people. Sometimes people don't want to do that, and they want to write a Post-it note, and sometimes they just want to take the feedback form they got at the front desk and write a note and give it to us privately. All of that is good. All of that will be captured. All of that will be made public. Literally every single comment we get through this process will be recorded and available on the website so that you can go home, look at it in a few days, and make sure what you said was part of this process. And if it's not, you should make sure I know that directly, because it should be in there going forward. Next slide. we have lots of time we're going to spend together. This is not a long process. It's also not a quick process. We've got lots of time that we're going to spend together. So we're kicking off here tonight. We're going to come back together on July 12th. We've got some unique summer engagement opportunities, understanding that the summer is often a really hard time to pull people together for community meetings. We want to talk about some of our thoughts for that and make sure they fit with your expectations. Then we'll come back together in the fall and continue to do these design charrettes. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the meeting format. I find in all engagement processes, the more you know what to expect, the better the process is going to go. So tonight's going to have one set of format, and then every other meeting we have is going to look pretty similar, and I want to walk through that. So tonight, we're going to wrap up this presentation portion here in a little bit, and then we've got 3 different ways to get feedback tonight. First and foremost, everyone got a feedback form when they came in. If you didn't, they're at the front. Feel free to write as extensively as you want on that, and make sure you leave it at the front desk when you're done. We're going to do about 20 minutes or so, nothing hard and fast about that, but about 20 minutes or so of Q&A in the room before we break up. So at that portion of the meeting, just line up at the microphone and we'll make sure we get to you. And then we're going to go back out into the hallway and do engagement stations. Engagement stations mean pick the topic you're most interested in, go up and talk to the folks who are going to be doing this. So we're going to have 4 different stations. We'll talk through what those look like. And at each of those stations, there's a feedback board where everything you want us to know should go on a Post-it note, get on that board. And our commitment is we will type them in verbatim. We're not going to be editing these. And we'll make them all public. We'll also analyze them, but we'll analyze them between each meeting and make sure that information is provided to the architects, et cetera, to inform their design. The next meetings are going to look a little bit different. Then we're going to get into the design charrette process, where we're all going to start like this, get a presentation on what we learned, what we're going to be doing tonight. Then we're going to break up into small tabletop exercises, where we're going to roll up our sleeves and be architects, be planners, be designers. We're going to sit around and make sure we're actually doing the iterative process that Bob talked about. We're also going to make sure at the end of each of those meetings, we come back together and everyone reports out on what their small group tabletop talked about. So it's a way of getting the planning into a process where everyone can be part of it, but you can also hear what everyone else worked on. So that's going to be the process going forward. Summer engagement opportunities. August, really hard time to pull people together for big format community meetings. We also don't want to lose that time in this process. We're at a college, so we thought office hours would be a good way to do some of this, which means we as a team, architecture team, our team, et cetera, will have multiple opportunities where we'll meet with you one-on-one in small groups, et cetera. Come in, discuss anything you want. We'll make sure it's all recorded and part of the process. We also want to come out to you and your groups during that process. So whether you're a civic group, a community group, a student group, a religious group, whatever group might have an opportunity for us as a team to come out and be part of that, please let us know that sooner rather than later so we can get those scheduled and make sure we're meeting with you where you're most interested. And then we're also going to have a time to do a tour of the existing site, look at the exterior of it, how's it situated, and that'll help inform the next design phases if we kind of do that all together. I'm not an architect. I don't know how many of you are, so I find the more we can kind of collectively get up to speed on this stuff, it helps the design process go better. Next slide is where I turn this back over to Bob.
All right. So as we said, we're going to begin our charrette process with just basically the parameters that are going to drive the design. And we thought we'd start with where the building's going to go. So up on the slide there is the current map of this portion of the campus. And the 2 buildings outlined in white are Science South and Falcon Hall. And so those 2 buildings will come down to create the site for the planned new math and science building. And then we thought we'd run through a graphic interpretation of all the commitments that were made by the college in the president's letter. Dr. Pollard already sort of reviewed that. I think it's we can sort of go through to the next slide after this, but this is just a bulletized version of that. So just go on to the next one. Okay, so one of the key commitments that we heard loud and clear was that the building should not encroach onto Takoma Avenue any further than the existing Falcon Hall. So we've gone ahead and put a tape measure on that. That's 110 feet from Takoma Avenue to that closest point to Falcon Hall. That's going to be our limit line. We're not going to propose any building construction any further southeast of that red line. And associated with that is that green park-like triangular space that's nestled between Fenton and Takoma, south of the parking lot. That also, the college has made very clear to us is off limits for development for this building. So the last part of that is also related is we're very cognizant of the fact that our neighbors immediately across Takoma Avenue, and that any fenestration or windows or louvers and things like that that are placed on the building, that we be very careful how they get addressed on that south face or that southeast face that faces Takoma Avenue. So we're going to really be looking at minimizing the architectural openings in that particular part of the building. One other commitment that was made, that the building would not be over 2 stories on the Takoma Avenue facade. As architects, we use certain planning metrics for buildings, especially in the environment for higher education. And one of the key metrics, and this is a little bit fungible, but a typical building width is about 70 feet. So we've taken that 110-foot setback and extended it another 70 feet. And that is what we're considering this zone of non-development above 2 stories. So you can see it highlighted in red there. So the parallel line for the 110 off of Takoma, and then another 70 feet beyond that, the building will not be over 2 stories in that red zone. Now, when we talk about stories, I heard this when we had the ice cream social. What does a story mean? Architecturally, it's pretty easy to define. It's like one level. But in a lab building like this, it's very critical that we get the proper amount of height for the rooms to work effectively. This is going to be a teaching environment, so there will be labs, lab benches, but you also need a certain amount of height above each one of the, or above the lab, so you can project, use projection screens, you can write on boards, and there's a lot of mechanical equipment that also comes down from the ceiling that services the benches. So that creates a very unique and specific height that we will be attempting to achieve, which is typically about 10 feet. And then above that is, I keep talking about all this mechanical service that goes into support the labs, a lot of ventilation to make sure that the caustic chemicals and things like that that are being handled in the lab are properly dealt with and properly managed through the system. And in order to do that correctly, you need to have enough space. So we are saying you need really 3 feet above the ceiling to get the right amount of ductwork to properly handle the air that's coming out of the space and being managed by the system further down the line. And then another 3 feet on that just for the structure itself to hold the building up. So overall, it averages out to about 16 feet floor to floor. One of the aspects of the site that I think has already been pretty clearly identified is that the site slopes from Fenton Street into the courtyard, and the current grade difference is about 10 feet. This presents an excellent opportunity that I think people have already identified to reduce the perceived height of the building, especially from the Fenton Street and Takoma Avenue sides. And what it also does is gives us an opportunity to get more natural light into the building, into the academic and student spaces that could be faced around that courtyard. So the project I showed you earlier at American University, we had a very similar challenge there. We were able to achieve a 1-story submersion of that building with the cross-section so that on one side of the building, you can enter and walk straight into one level that would be completely below grade on the other side of the building. Anyone that has been there will attest to that it's completely imperceptible that you're actually below grade with the way we've treated the natural light and the skylights and other aspects of the design to minimize the presence or the perception of being below grade. And then this further defines what that grade difference is, and also with some of the elevations of the current Falcon Hall. So the portion of Falcon Hall that is the closest to the Takoma Avenue neighbors is about 20 feet above grade, and then that sloped roof that goes beyond that is another 32.5 feet above grade. So again, we're being very cautious and aware of some of these existing conditions because we know whatever we propose that's radically different from that, you're going to see it as a clear deviation. So we want to make sure we fully understand it and understand how you perceive it first before we propose any new design or design massings that would encroach on that area. So one of the other aspects that was committed to was locating any rooftop equipment on the northern half of the site. We've actually already engaged an air entrainment specialist as part of the project, and they're a specialty engineering consulting group that will go out and test current fluid dynamics and air dynamics around the site to understand where is the proper place to put equipment like this. And they're already looking at it to verify where is the right place to put that kind of equipment. And they're telling us we're probably in the right place right now, where the commitment is now. And so we've taken the other aspect was to maximize the building width and lower the height. So we went ahead and took all the basic limit lines that have already been established, like how far you can build close to Fenton Street, how far you might encroach into the campus, and then what are the natural limit lines to try to configure this building around the existing buildings. And that is defined by that blue area that you see outlined on the site. Now, we could try to build a building that looks like that, in that shape, but it wouldn't work very well from a higher education point of view. There's a particular amount of adjacency and organization of the building vertically that needs to happen for it to function properly, especially with the mechanical systems and the structural systems. And also, if a building is too spread out, it doesn't work very well from an adjacency point of view. So there's a happy medium here where we would obviously need to have a multiple-story building. We can't have it spread out too much, but also we don't want it too tall. A building that's too tall then fragments the programs too much, and there isn't enough synergy or cross collaboration between the different programs if they're layered up or stratified on different floors. So as we move forward in design, we'll be sharing with you further development on some of these ideas and how they would manifest themselves into massing on the site within that blue area. And then the last one was to hire an architect, and hopefully we've proven to you that we were the right choice in that particular aspect. So that's it for the site analysis. And I'll hand it back over to Michael.
Great. Let's get to the engagement portion. So we're going to do Q&A, and then we're going to go out in the hallway. When you go out in the hallway, there are 4 different stations. Rotate through them at your leisure. The first one is major considerations. It is that chart that you saw with all the different buckets that we're trying to make sure we have a full understanding of what are the considerations, what are the concerns, what are the challenges. If you didn't see something up on the chart that Bob showed you that's really important to you, make sure it gets up on that chart so that can be our checkpoint for going forward. We've got one on site analysis, which are some of the drawings you saw today blown up so you can get up close and personal and start asking questions about all the different lines. The Smith group will be staffing that station. Math and science at Montgomery College. That's a station all about what's happening here in math and science so we can really understand what's happening inside the buildings, what are we trying to adjust for, what do our students need, etc. That station will be staffed by Montgomery College officials, and then the community engagement process my team will be staffing, and that's where we really want to get from you in as much detail as possible. Who do we need to reach? How do we reach them? What are we missing? What are the best ways to do this? And we really want to make sure we get good feedback on that. So after you're done with the engagement stations, the meeting's done, so feel free to leave at your leisure, but everything that's recorded will be put up online in the near future so you can see it before the next meeting. And with that, our very next meeting is on July 12th. The website is where you can get all of the information. As was stated, this meeting is also being recorded, and that video will be put up there. So that is the end of the presentation portion. We'd love to get some Q&A in before we break up into engagement stations. So feel free to come on up to the microphones, and we'll get started. I feel like we should have some like Price is Right music to get people up to the microphones. Anyone have questions? We'd run the mic to you, but for the cameras, it's easier if you come up, so I apologize for that. Sir.
Can you yet speak to the parking impact and some of the areas shown covering the current parking lot and what the expected parking load for the college will be after this building is built?
Great. Good question. Bob?
I could try to answer that. It's been made very clear to us by the college that we will not be adding any parking, and that the current parking lots are, do not necessarily need to be replaced or kept in kind. So it's kind of like hasn't really been defined yet. But I mean, there's really there's no new parking that's planned, and we're not planning on removing all the parking as well. So it's yet to be determined.
Hi, my name is John Hannon. I'm a neighbor on Islington Street, not on Takoma or Fenton. 2 questions. One is about the trees in the triangular area. I thought of that because of the dimensions that you were talking about and what's a story. What is the height of the trees? Because that's going to be a major site, a vision protector for the folks on Takoma.
So that is not something that we have on hand, but they're very mature trees. And
they're
I would
very
have to,
large,
yeah,
very
there's got to be in the 50-foot range would be my guess. Does anybody know specifically? I don't know. No, we can find out.
That would be good to know. And I do think one of the commitments was to keep all of that, correct?
Yes,
the whole
and
area
I think,
and the trees.
again, we don't have the contractor here yet, but I can tell you that based on the design parameters and the limit lines that we've been establishing, there's very little likelihood that they would need to have any kind of construction activity in that area.
Okay. And the second question was to yourself. You were going to take comments and then go through a feedback loop. But part of that process is dealing with the architect and how do they respond to the comments. How is that going to work?
It's a great question. So I'll give you as granular as a detail as I can, and then we can expand more if it's not what you're looking for. So after tonight, every single Post-it note, comment form, and people are taking notes with the Q&A will all be logged into basically a glorified spreadsheet where we'll record them verbatim. And then between this meeting and the next one, we will go through as a team. Again, we're not architects, we're objective on what happens here, and we'll pull out any key themes, what we heard, and we'll report out both verbatim and key themes to the architecture team and to the college. This is what we heard for feedback. So as you're putting together the tabletop exercises and the designs for consideration, make sure they respond to what you heard at the last meeting. We'll also be posting all of that to the website so no one's wondering where that analysis is coming from. So all that'll be made public and online. And then the next time we come together, when Bob and I are here, we'll be reporting out. In our last meeting, these are the key themes. This is what we heard. This is what we think we heard. Did we get that right? And that's informed what we're presenting to you tonight based on X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think what I was thinking of is not wanting to avoid a situation where you're going to the architects, the architects are responding, and then we're hearing it back filtered through you.
Right.
But it sounds like it'll be coming back through both you, the architecture group and
Absolutely. We are going to be working hand in hand in this. And the architects will be at all of the community engagement sessions as well to try and limit that amount of filtering.
Yeah. So we will hopefully, whatever the comments are, be explaining or presenting the design with that commentary in mind, and hopefully reciting any kind of specific comments that led to a particular design response in one of the subsequent iterations.
That's a great question. Other questions, sir?
Thank you. My name is Rashad Seibert. I'm a student at Takoma Park campus. I'm also a student assistant in environmental safety office. So indeed, some of my questions come from an environmental standpoint. First, just wanted to know if you will be working with an environmental monitoring firm, like with the construction, things like that, just to kind of help me think in the future along the process. And the second question had to do with indoor air quality for the students. I know with LEED certification, maybe there is a little portion that has to do with indoor air quality. And I know you mentioned silver. I just wanted to know if that's included in that standard.
Yes, it is normally. So the LEED certification usually has a variety of different categories that you can achieve points in multiple categories to get certification. To get to silver, we would almost absolutely have to have some kind of indoor environmental air quality achievement to meet that certification. So relative to having any kind of environmental consulting during construction, there is a requirement by the county that there is monitoring of any kind of construction contamination during the construction process, including the stormwater runoff. There will be a requirement that the entire perimeter of the construction site gets fenced off and that no runoff is allowed to leave the site. These are all very standardized expectations in today's construction industry, so it really shouldn't be anything that is outside the normal expectations for the contractor that's brought on board.
If you don't mind, a quick follow-up. Yes, so obviously these buildings are old. I'm not sure how old this one is specifically, but if it is old enough to have certain materials that might affect folks, then that's why I'm bringing that up. Like, are they going to be responsible for, releasing the site?
So these buildings are of an era where they most likely have some kind of contamination in them. So when the demolition does happen, that's usually done in a very careful way with specialists that know how to handle those materials. And we haven't really got into those details with the college yet. But again, there's very specific requirements that are law that will be followed to handle the demolition and the disposal of any of the existing materials on the site. And I can tell you it's very, very serious and taken very seriously by all the contractors we've worked with. So I can give you some assurance that it will be taken care of.
Richard Wheel. I live on Takoma Avenue. I've been here about 33 years across from the college. 2 remarks. First off, I want to thank Montgomery College and Smith Group and Link for being here, and the presentation I've seen so far. It's very encouraging. I know a lot of work was put into it. And the other item is, do you have a schedule for the 5 stages that you've gone over at this point? Do we know a start and a completion anticipated?
Well, so I referenced it a little bit when we talked about the phases, but our ultimate goal with this initial process is to get the mandatory referral, and that is targeted for October. There is a high probability that some of the issues that we've been showing and been talking about will be discussed and have other sessions after that submission. So it's into October, and then probably a few months after that some of this additional commentary or discussion will continue to be a part of the engagement.
All right, thank you.
3 community meetings before mandatory referral and 2 after.
Right.
Hi, I'm David Kaplan. I live on New York Avenue. Could you be a little more specific? I had the same question that Richard did, but I know you had 5 separate stages,
right.
And so the 5th stage is mid-October.
Yeah.
But along the way, especially stages 1, 2, and 3, could you give us a little bit more detail about your guesstimate as to when you'll be shifting from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3? That would be helpful to know.
So we've already committed to the next meeting, which I believe is July 12th. And so that will be that 2nd stage. So the design, some of the initial massing and form will be presented at that meeting. The August summer period that we've already identified will likely be between 2 and 3. And then from 3 to 5 would be September into October.
Right, thanks. And a follow-up question. You provided a schematic that showed a setback from Takoma Avenue. You didn't include a setback for Lower Fenton, or the building that you had etched out in the blue. Yeah, it went further towards Fenton than the existing footprint, for example.
Right. So the building at the northern end of the site has a similar setback. So that's just the typical setback from the street that's allowable.
Right, and so is that something that is under consideration as part of this design charrette process, or is this something that you're coming to us and saying this has been established as a set parameter that you're going to work with, and it's not on the table? So
that limit line just defines that we cannot build any closer to the street than that. Doesn't suggest that we are building on that line. Okay. So I think some of the design options that you'll see, some may be on that line, close to that line, some may be further away. We honestly haven't really done any design work yet. We'll be doing that over the course of the next couple of weeks.
And is it the same the case for the setback for no higher than 2 stories? You've got, I can't see it, 70 feet?
Yeah.
And so you're saying that, you're not saying it will be up to 70 feet, but you certainly won't go any closer than 70 feet.
No, so the 70 feet is measured horizontally, right? So that's the width of that setback.
Understood.
So the 2 stories would be within that 70-foot zone that is set back 110 feet from Takoma Avenue.
Right. And is that something that's open for discussion? In other words, if community members believe that the 70 feet horizontal figure should be 120 feet, is that something that you're open to, or is that something you're telling us that those issues have been decided?
I don't think any of it has been decided. I think that's why we're having this conversation.
Right, right. What went into making those particular
So
determinations?
I discussed that a little bit, but the 70 feet comes from a convention in architecture of typical building footprint. So a typical higher education building of this nature would be about 70 feet wide. If you have a double-loaded corridor with 2 labs on each side and a corridor down the middle, it's about 70 feet. So that's just a common metric. So if we were saying that there was going to be a singular building and it was aligned along Takoma Avenue, it would be about 70 feet wide, give or take, depending upon what the particular attributes of any unique design may vary that a little bit.
Thank you.
Great. If you have any other specific questions that we haven't addressed, please, we'll all be outside at engagement station, so let's break there. Our team will be in place, and thank you for your attention tonight. Looking forward to talking with you. Appreciate it.